Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and today I want to share with you the books and resources for an astronomy unit study for elementary school. The first thing I want to share with you are two books that can be the spine for your unit study. Both of these books are quite dated, so I don't recommend necessarily these books themselves, but a book similar to it, unless you find the secondhand. However, when it comes to astronomy books, I have found that there have been so many new discoveries that it might be worthwhile getting a more recent publication. So the first book I want to share with you is quite old from our homeschool library, one of our very first purchases. It's the Discoveries series. This one is on planets and stars. I apologize, stars and planets. I believe the publication for this book is 2003, but I'm going to check that for you. Yeah, Barnes and Noble Books 2003. There are others in this series. It is nice if you find it secondhand. I found some of the other books enjoyable early on in our homeschooling. This book is going to make a really easy spine for this main lesson block or unit study. And I think grades, say 2 to 3, like 2nd to 3rd grade up until about 4th to 5th grade, maybe 4th grade. I do have 2 other videos that showcase the books and resources for middle school, as well as books and resources for a Waldorf main lesson block. And all of the resources in each of those videos are different than the resources here. So I encourage you to check out those videos for other resources that can support your unit study or main lesson block. And we tend to like to use a variety of resources because I'm often homeschooling multiple ages, multiple grades. And so it is nice to have some of these resources that I'm going to share with you today are actually ones that I will use for upper elementary, middle school, even a little bit with 9th grade, just because it's really enjoyable to have some of these books. However, I find that it is much easier to include the assortment of books that I'm going to share with you today, especially the picture books, when you are homeschooling multiple grades, when you have those younger students with the older students. I would not necessarily recommend that you go out and buy these picture books if you have an older student, as enjoyable as they would be, just because the vibes might be off with your older student wondering why you have such a childish book. So this book is going to take you and give you like a general overview of astronomy with the planets and beyond. And this is a really great way to get general information about astronomy in a way that I think is suitable for an elementary student. The books here are not in support for a Waldorf approach for this main lesson block. If you want to see that one specifically, it is linked in the description box below. And I do encourage you to check out the blog post that accompanies this video that has all of the other videos and tutorials, as well as all of the resources linked, not just for these resources in this video, but for the other videos as well. That way you can get a great assortment of resources. When you're doing an astronomy unit, if you're following a more of a Waldorf approach, then you're doing the things that are visible in the night sky for that student. If you're going to do an astronomy unit study, then I think it is fabulous to dive deep into the planets. I love learning about the planets. And this is going to give you a bit of information about each of the planets. If you want to go into more depth about each of the planets, I do have some books that can support that. Otherwise, I do highly recommend you buying a book just on the planet that you want to explore, because those books tend to have more depth of their information. They tend to have more illustrations or photographs, and I find that I really appreciate that kind of broad view on that individual subject area. Another book that I have that can give you a general overview of astronomy is my book of space. However, this one is going to focus a little bit different than the previous book. It is going to take you through and give you a general overview of the planets and our solar system, but this book is a little different in that it's going to focus on the moon a lot more. So you're going to have a lot more information about the phases of the moon and even the moon landing and information about rockets and space exploration. So if that's something that your student is interested in, this would be a great resource to include. In all of our units or main lesson blocks, I love to include a variety of books ones that I can read to my student, ones that my students can read for themselves as independent learning, and as often as we can, we like to include biographies and hands-on projects. So I want to share with you some of the biographies that could support a main lesson block or unit study on astronomy. This is Who Was Galileo? These books are really easy and simple to read. I would put this at a middle elementary level, maybe 3rd to 5th grade. It really depends on the student. In the past, these are books that I might have read aloud to my students, especially if I had younger students who weren't at this reading level, but were still participating in the main lesson block or unit study. At this point in our homeschooling journey, these are books that I assign to my student. Now, these are far below grade level, so for my student, it might take like a half an hour, maybe 45 minutes at most to read a book like this, but it serves a couple of purposes. It allows me to have some independent work for my students so that I can prepare other lessons. It gives my students some kind of homework per se, so that they have some personal obligations to the lesson rather than always waiting for me to deliver a lesson, which a lot of our lessons are ones that I'm actively delivering, which means that having something that I can have my student do independently is really a big help. If your student is younger, this might be something that you read aloud with your student as part of your unit study. And if your student is capable of reading these books on their own, then this makes fabulous independent reading. I have a few more in this series. I have Who Was Albert Einstein? And this may work for your astronomy unit depending on where you take your astronomy unit, or you can just save this for a physics unit. Who Was Neil Armstrong? This will also help if you are doing a lot more with space exploration and in specific with the moon landing. And then the last one is Who Were the Wright Brothers? And of course, this is the very beginning of our space exploration. If we can't get off the ground and fly around our planet, there is just no hope of us breaking the gravitational field of Earth and making it to the moon. So this is a great addition, especially if you chose to do like a mini unit on this time period or these inventions, or even a little bit with the Industrial Revolution. That might be interesting. I don't usually connect the Wright brothers and the beginning of that invention with my astronomy main lesson block, but it's definitely something that you could include if you wanted to. Starry Messenger is the story of Galileo. I think this is a really beautiful presentation of the book. The only thing that I find difficult about this book, and it's made it difficult to read, is that the parts of the book that you can read that are in simple text are right here. However, there's also this scripted text over here, which is a little bit more challenging to read. The illustrations, of course, are really beautiful. They are dated, in my opinion, but they are the kind of illustrations that I really like. You certainly could find more modern resources on Galileo, but I do really enjoy this picture book, and I think it fits really well with this unit study. I have many other picture books to share with you as well, but they are more current. This is the one that is a little bit more dated, but works really well with our main lesson block on astronomy, and I think that it would support a unit study as well. But before I get into all of those other picture books, let me share with you these two picture books that are so beautiful and so visually stunning, but we've just had a really hard time really making them work with not just our astronomy main lesson block or unit study, but with just anything. We haven't really used them that much with our opening activities either, even though they are so beautiful, and I just don't know why they just haven't worked so well for us. So the first one is called Lindbergh, The Tale of a Flying Mouse. And these books, there may be more in the series, but we have two of them. This story, similar to the story of the Wright brothers, supports an astronomy unit adjacent. It's not exactly related to the astronomy unit, but you can see that in order to explore the solar system and beyond, we do need to be able to fly and eventually build rockets so that we can explore outside of our planet. However, when it comes to astronomy and the observable universe, you don't need this kind of technology. The most technology that was used is, like, say, a quadrant or a telescope, binoculars currently could work, but in the past, those were the main instruments or tools that were used. So you don't need to leave this planet in order to have a really good understanding of astronomy. However, all of the missions or the Voyagers or non-manned explorers, for instance, the Mars rover, that kind of technology has allowed us to get a closer view of our solar system in particular. And so for that, we do need, or we have benefited from that technology. But in general, this book and the next one called Armstrong are ones that I think are so beautiful. They're really great for really young elementary. They're captivating, they're enjoyable, they're told from the perspective of an animal rather than the actual person, and there's just a lot of whimsy around that. Unfortunately, it just didn't work so well with our main lesson blocks and unit studies, but I did still want to share them with you because they're so beautiful. This one's called Armstrong, The Adventurous Journey of a Mouse to the Moon. And the beginning of the book actually explains to you the whole purpose of having a book like this. And it says, this imaginative retelling of the first journey to the moon is true. Mostly the challenges and problem solving, the inventiveness and dedication, the tests and failures, and yes, the tragedy and ultimately the success all occurred much as they are depicted here. So this is a really nice way to bring a real life event to a child in a manner that can be understood by a child, especially told through the story or through the lens of a mouse. So two really beautiful books that unfortunately didn't really work so well for us. Before I move on to these other stacks of books, I want to share with you our large stack of picture books that can support an astronomy unit. I love picture books. I think that they are one of the most underrated resources for both classroom and homeschool environment. And I really love picture books that are not just beautifully illustrated, but also with robust content, that the content can be for anyone in elementary school and even beyond, even middle school. And in some cases, I find that me as an adult, I have learned so much by reading picture books of all kinds. Now, I don't mean the picture books that are written specifically for a child to read, the really basic ones with very simple sentences, maybe at a first, second, third grade level. Those are not the picture books that I'm speaking of. The picture books that I'm speaking of are these kinds of books that are meant to be read aloud by an adult to a child. This one is called Counting on Catherine, How Katherine Johnson Saved Apollo 13. And this is a really beautiful picture book. It's also a book and the time period and the social injustice at the time. This would also carry over into other lessons potentially. And while this is again astronomy adjacent, I think that it's really important to bring up, as in my opinion, as many scientists, astronomers, especially women, to the forefront of education. I think it's important not just for our young women, our young girls, but also for our young men, our young boys to see this as well. This book is a more current book, so the illustrations also reflect that. And this has also been made into a movie, which I also have here. Hidden Figures is the movie that is based on Katherine Johnson's life, as well as the other women in this book. So this one's called Hidden Figures, The True Story of 4 Black Women and the Space Race. I think I like the illustrations in this book a little bit more, but the storyline for both books is just incredible. Caroline's Comet's A True Story. This is a book that I don't care for the illustrations as much, but the story itself is really brilliant. And this is a little bit older, so I think this takes place in the 1700s. Yep, so Caroline was born in 1750 in Hanover. And then this story just takes you through her contributions to science and astronomy in particular. And what's really motivating about a book like this is how challenging it was, and maybe still is in some parts of the world or for some families, to be a woman in education, a woman in science, a woman taking on a role that in the past was reserved just for men, where even getting the education itself was a challenge, let alone finding a job within that arena. So this book is inspiring in that sense, that she was able to break cultural norms in order to do this, and was brilliant at her work and made some amazing contributions to astronomy. A computer called Catherine, how Katherine Johnson helped put America on the moon. So this is another story about Katherine Johnson, and it might be confusing if you're like, oh, how does a computer have to do with astronomy? And that's because in the past, before we had computers that could do the work of people in their computations, in the mathematical computations, people were called computers. And so that is why the title is like that, in case it was of confusion for you. And so this is, again, similar to the story on Katherine Johnson. I love the story so much. And so we have basically 3 stories surrounding this topic area. Not only is it a fabulous contribution as far as like women in science, but also Black women in science at a time when the segregation was intense. And if you watch the movie, you'll definitely get a greater sense of that struggle. But in the books, the struggle is not as clearly defined as it is. It's just more prominent when you see the movie. So anyway, this is another great inclusion to add to your astronomy unit. On Earth. This is the kind of book that I do not care for personally. It's a picture book, that's great, but the style of writing and the content is not the kinds that I'm typically looking for. This one is very simple. This is almost like a bedtime story, the way that the way it's minimal in its content. And it's just beautiful, but it's definitely not a book that I would specifically search for and buy in support of this main lesson block. Now, originally when I saw it, I did not see the inside, and I thought that it would work with our main lesson block and our unit study. But once we got it, we realized that it really wasn't going to be supportive. However, at the time I was homeschooling quite young children, and so for that, it could work. But considering the kinds of books that I typically look for, this isn't necessarily the kind that I would want to add. However, it might be just right for your needs, depending on how you are putting together your unit study. So I definitely want to still show it. May Among the Stars. This is another biography that is in support of an astronomy unit adjacent. So again, I love to include the biographies and the scientists, especially the female scientists, and then minorities, so people of color or anyone who had to, in some way, fight against what was the norm in order to make their contributions or in order to get their education. And so this is another one of those opportunities to bring in these kinds of stories. Now, the illustrations are not the kind that I typically like, and the content for this book is way more basic than what I typically go for. However, when there aren't a lot of choices, and granted, there are so many more choices now than there were then and when I was buying these books. However, so I was happy to have this at the time. However, I would look for content that had more to it, and the illustrations are not quite the kind that I like so much, but again, at the time, I was just really thrilled to be able to include these books. Astronaut Scott Kelly, My Journey to the Stars. This book is nice, but it doesn't really support what I was trying to do when putting together our Waldorf-inspired main lesson block on astronomy. However, if you are looking to include more about exploration or the moon, and you're doing a unit study, then this book will support that really beautifully. What's nice about this book that's a little different than other picture books is that you're going to get some actual photographs of the astronaut, which is really nice, bringing in that human touch to, that very human touch to the book itself. This is not a book that I typically would be looking for, but in looking for biographies to support our unit study on astronomy, this one came up and I was happy to include it. It's not one that, in my opinion, I would be reading often to my child the way that I might read some other stories often to my child. But what I do like about this is the very real experience that astronauts will have and the trials they'll have when they are going into space, and some of the consequences and outcomes of being in space for a prolonged period of time. The next book is called Look Up, Henrietta Levit, Pioneer Woman Astronomer. I personally like these kinds of illustrations. I know they feel a little bit dated and they're maybe not as popular or current as illustrations that you're going to find in picture books today. And again, I love having the opportunity to include female scientists and astronomers, doctors, anyone in a field where in the past it wasn't easy to accommodate, or it was just literally not allowed to accommodate women. And these are the kinds of stories that I really love to include. More than the astronomer or the discoveries that these women have made, I just love the perseverance and the ingenuity they've had to use in order to be in these kinds of arenas. And really, this was the case even up into the mid last century. There were still these issues and problems and hurdles for women in these fields. The next one is Margaret and the Moon, How Margaret Hamilton Saved the First Moon Landing. So the illustrations for this book, and because it's a picture book, I like to talk about the illustrations because I tend to choose books, especially picture books, based on the illustrations. Now, these illustrations are definitely not my vibe. However, I think that it works really well for the way that this book is written. And what's really curious is that a lot of these illustrations are actually based on the photographs that you can see here, the actual photographs of Margaret, and they're all in the back of the book. So I thought that that was kind of nice to include them because as I was going through the book, I was actually skeptical of some of the illustrations, and I was telling my daughter, I'm not sure about this or that or the other, and then you get to the back of the book and you actually see those photographs here, and that just, I love how that all got connected. Moving on, we have The Girl Who Named Pluto. I really love this book. We include this book even when we're not doing an astronomy main lesson block. This story, first of all, it's so beautifully illustrated. I love the illustrations. I love how moody it kind of feels. So Pluto was discovered early in the 20th century, so early 1900s, and a contest was sent out to see, like, what are we going to name this planet? And this young girl wrote in her submission, and that it was chosen. It was chosen to be named Pluto, and she had, a reason why. And so this is just a really beautiful story of the discovery of Pluto, the naming of Pluto, and then if you go on enough in history, the demotion of Pluto, and that it's no longer a planet. So that I love this book. I love the colors, the moodiness of it, the story itself, and this little young child, this girl who gets to be the one to name the planet. Her submission is chosen. The next book I want to share with you is Find the Constellations. This is a book that is in the same illustration style as the Curious George books. We got this the last time we did our astronomy main lesson block, but we ended up not using it extensively. So I like the idea of the book. I like the concept of exploring the stories behind the constellations. This is definitely something that we will do in our Waldorf main lesson block. We just didn't end up utilizing this book as much as I thought we would. I do highly recommend the stories associated to the constellations, whether you're doing a unit study or a main lesson block approach. I think that's a great way to begin your unit study. It's something that's observable for the child and imaginative because you're going through the stories. So this is one resource that's available. I do have other resources if you are interested. They are in the other videos for putting together an astronomy unit or main lesson block. Let's work through this pile of books. The first one is called Eclipse, How the 1919 Solar Eclipse Proved Einstein's Theory of General Relativity. So if you're looking to add a little unit on Einstein in addition to your astronomy unit, this book would be a great way to support that, as well as this book. And before I forget, these two books as well, which I will show you shortly. So this is a picture book that talks about the solar eclipse. And there was a solar eclipse not too long ago, and I believe that is the reason why I end up buying this book. It's not exactly the content or the illustrations that I really wanted. Sometimes it is hard to find just the right resource. And so I did get this one. I thought it might be a good addition. And it's okay. And it's nice to be able to have something that can support a very specific aspect of our observation of the day and nighttime sky. So astronomy is more robust than that, but for this very specific topic, it was nice to be able to have that. And to circle back, it was nice to be able to have that if you were going to bring up anything related to Einstein's laws of relativity or his life in general. So before we move on to these other books, let me show you my first book of relativity. I love the way this book is illustrated, and I like the content too, but I cannot abide by the title, my first book of relativity. The way that the book is presented, it makes you feel like it's for a really young child, and I honestly don't think that these are concepts for young children. I think young children should be experiencing physics, they should be experiencing life, they should be experiencing nature sciences by living them, observing them. And when it comes to physics, children are living physics. Probably some of the very first sciences that they're actually experiencing are the physics. So they're dropping things, they're observing gravity, they're moving things, they're finding out how heavy something is, how something moves. These are the very first things that a really young child, like a toddler, a baby, is experiencing. But this book, the content and the concepts themselves are for an older student, in my opinion. The reason why I've placed it here with this unit study for elementary is because I think that it goes really well with some of the other picture books that I've included on Einstein. So while this is not astronomy necessarily, it does, like, these concepts are really important for us understanding the solar system and the galaxy and ultimately the universe. If you're looking for a very simple, beautiful, whimsical picture book on Einstein, then On a Beam of Light might be what you're looking for. At first, I wasn't sure about the illustrations. They really kind of were strange to me, but they have totally grown on me over the years. We've had this book for a while. I really like the story as well because it really talks about Einstein as a person and his life and his interests, and then also talks about the science, almost like it's secondary to his life itself. And I really like that approach. I feel like it's just right for young students and for a variety of ages. So this is not something that I would specifically buy for upper elementary or junior high, but having it included because I have younger children means that the older students can also benefit from a story like this. Let's move on to some of the books that are a little bit more on astronomy and the constellations. So this is called Eye on the Universe, Cosmic Light Shows. This is a book that I picked up secondhand. A lot of the books that I have that are older, I don't necessarily suggest buying those particular books, but it's just to give you an idea of the books that you can include in a main lesson block or in a unit study. I do recommend just checking the publication date so that you can see possibly if there's anything that you need to adjust as you read through it, any new discoveries or new information, new photographs that are taken from the Hubble telescope or otherwise. This is just a really beautiful book that gives you a general overview of astronomy, and I do like that it does have the constellations as well. So a lot of times when I'm getting a general overview of astronomy, sometimes it overlooks the constellations, and I love that there's a section here on the constellations, and I would just suggest that you get another book that goes into the stories of the constellations, like this book called The Glow in the Dark Zodiac Storybook. And this is also an older book. The illustrations certainly are a little bit dated, but what I like about it is that it gives you a very short story to coordinate with the constellation, and then you have these illustrations that are quite unique. I haven't seen illustrations quite like this when looking at the constellations. They're a little bit more basic with the constellation within the sky, with sort of like a basic silhouette or outline of the illustration. So this gives you a little bit more, and of course it gives you a very short recap of the story. There are other resources that give you more detailed stories about the constellations. One Small Square, The Night Sky. There are many in this series. I believe I got this from Acorn Naturalist, and I believe I got all of them in this series. At the time, and still now, I really love them. I love the illustrations. I love the content. My only issue, and this is a me issue, not a book issue, is that we never were able to utilize these books as well as I had thought we would, as well as I anticipated. We have them for other subject areas, and anytime that I include them in a main lesson block or unit study, I have high hopes of using them in a way that I think is going to be so engaging for my students and so enjoyable, and it just doesn't end up being that way. And sometimes I even struggle to read through the content and keep myself inspired, but I still have them, I'll still use them. And if we're not reading them cover to cover, although this is definitely a book that I think could be a really great spine for this unit study, if we're not going to use it as a spine or read it cover to cover, then I will definitely pick certain pages to read to support some of the other lessons that we're doing. If You Were Me and Lived on Mars, I love this series so much. They have If You Were Me and Lived in Viking Times, or in the Middle Ages, and this one is on Mars. And it's just imaginative. I love it so much. It talks about all the things that you would need if you were going to live on Mars. And so in that way, it teaches you about the environment of Mars, the challenges, the weather conditions, the atmosphere. It teaches you all of that in relation to if you were to live on Mars, and more importantly, if you were a child and you were living on Mars. So I love this book. I love all of the books in the series so much. I feel like it's very relatable to a student, to a child, versus some of the other books, even if they're written for a student, they're not written at that perspective. And so I really love these books. If you find them for other subject areas, I highly recommend them. The next book I have is called Black Holes and Other Space Phenomena. I think this book goes through concepts that are better suited for an older student. However, it's written and illustrated for elementary age students, in my opinion. So when we have used this with our Waldorf main lesson block, which is intended for, say, 6th grade, 7th grade, maybe even young 8th grade students, I found that this book just did not have enough information. It was sort of curious and interesting. We went through certain pages. We did not read this cover to cover, but it didn't have enough information or keep us engaged enough. Therefore, I think that it's better suited for a younger audience, a younger student. And the illustrations are pretty interesting. Again, if this is an older resource, then I don't recommend actually seeking out these resources. This one's from 1995. I think that if you happen to find them at used bookstores, etc., then I think it's great to include them. If you're looking for illustrations that are going to be a little bit more iconic for like the 90s and early 2000s, you're not going to find these kinds of illustrations today, even if you find the content. Let's move on to a couple of the projects and hands-on activities that I have. One game that I share almost with every main lesson block or unit study is the Professor Noggins games. I've already shared it with putting together this unit study for middle school, but I will quickly share it here again now. This is the Professor Noggins trivia-based cards. It has illustrations on the front and it has questions on the back. They are going through and updating all of their games. I don't know that this one has been updated yet with new, not illustrations, photographs. And the questions, I believe, are also updated as well, and they're in this orientation. We love playing this game as part of our opening activities. We have them for so many different subject areas. We don't always play the actual game that we are the actual subject of the game that we're doing in our main lesson block, especially since this is trivia based. We often will play this after we've done a little bit of the unit study or main lesson block so that we have the information. Otherwise, we can't answer any of the questions. The next project I want to share with you are these trivia-based cards that we made inspired by the Professor Noggins games. We have them on all of the planets and a couple other astronomical topics, and these are ones that we watercolored on the front. These measure approximately 4.5 inches by 6 inches. And then on the back, we have questions that are similar in nature to the kinds of questions that you'd find in Professor Noggins. There's some true and false, fill in the blank, things like that. Now, I did this with my student at the time, and so he has a set, and he has written on the back. We did laminate them once they were done, and then I have a set. And we try to make them challenging enough because then we like to quiz each other with these cards. There is a tutorial on how to make these, and you can find it in the complete playlist for our astronomy unit, and that's in the description box below, the link for that one. This is a project that we purchased the last time we did our astronomy main lesson block. In the 20 plus years that we've homeschooled, we've done an astronomy main lesson block at least 4 times, or maybe a total of 4 times over the years, maybe 5. I think there might have been one student who wanted to do it more than once. When we bought this the last time for our astronomy main lesson block, we didn't actually get to it, so we're going to try to use it this time. What I like about it is that it includes some building, and of course it includes an aspect of science, not exactly what a rocket would be like, but I think when children are young, it's really enjoyable to at least try to imitate some of these things that are necessary for travel, for airplanes, for rockets, for launching satellites, etc. When I purchased this, I was doing a main lesson block for my son. At the time, he might have been between 12 and 14 years old. This time that I'm doing this astronomy main lesson block, it's for my daughter who's 13 and 14 years old. In the year that she started this lesson, she was 13 and she's 14 now. She has different interests when it comes to hands-on projects. I will offer this project to her. I'm not sure that she is as interested. Actually, I'm fairly certain that she is not as interested in the hands-on construction projects that my previous all 3 of my boys were way more interested in these kinds of projects than she is. She has different interests. However, I'll still offer this project to her and see if she wants to construct it and try it out, because we don't have a lot of hands-on projects for this main lesson block, but there is one resource that includes a lot of very easy to do, easy to replicate projects. It is the Galileo book that you can find in the unit study of astronomy for middle school or upper elementary. And in that book, it includes 25 projects that you can do. And that's a great resource to include projects that are important in understanding the mechanics with gravity on Earth as well as in outer space. Another project that's really great for young students is by Nature Watch. Nature Watch has really fantastic hands-on projects. You mostly find them as a classroom kit, but you can also find them individually for the homeschool family. So this classroom kit is for the phases of the moon. It is a game that you can play. It's going to come with the discs for assembling the game and with the stickers, which are somewhere in here. Here they are. With the stickers for the discs and the game itself. This game is intended for younger students, but I do think that it's really helpful even for an older student. If you're not consistently observing the phases of the moon, then having something that can help you really understand that is going to be helpful. And really, to be honest, I think that it takes well into adulthood to really understand. If you're not consistently out there looking at the moon and knowing when the new moon is, etc., then I think it sometimes takes into adulthood to really understand what's happening with the phases of the moon. How do you notice a new crescent? Where does a new crescent rise? What's the shape of a new crescent versus an older crescent, or an old crescent rather? So if you're not consistently observing that, then a game like this can really be helpful. But since it's intended for younger students, it might be hard to get your older students involved in it. So you might look at more of an artistic expression of the phases of the moon rather than a game that's maybe a little bit too juvenile. What I do like about the Nature Watch games and their projects is that it's so well done. I believe it comes with 25. Yeah, the kits are for 25 students. I really don't know if that's reasonable for classrooms. I feel like classrooms have more than 25 students, but it is for 25 students. You could certainly buy more than one if you needed to. It comes with like the information, the details on how to assemble the game, and even more about the topic area. And again, I love their attention to detail. It even comes with bags to keep your discs in them so that it doesn't get lost. So I love all of that related to the games and the projects that Nature Watch produces and carries. And so if you were looking to include some of that into your lessons, then I highly recommend this company. The thing is that they're intended for classrooms, and so you're mostly going to see it in classroom size, which is going to be, of course, more expensive than if you buy it individually. If you buy individually, the cost does go up. I do think they have a homeschool offer where you can get a number of kits all together in one. We've always just opted to get the classroom kit. That way we can use it with multiple of our own children, because I don't want to just buy the one. I want enough for all of my kids, or to share with other homeschoolers. In some cases, we've done the projects multiple times. This is one project that we have not done multiple times. We have one for the family that my kids made. We don't need more. But the ones that are nature-based, we often will do more than one of those projects, so it really makes sense for us to get the classroom kit. We also have Little Professor Science kits it's called For Curious Cats. That's really cute. So this one is going to come with a number of different science projects to do. We started this one many years ago when doing our astronomy unit, and there are still a lot of materials left in here. So we are going to try this out and see what projects we can do with my daughter. Some of them are still assembled and still in here. I think the thing that went first, if I'm not mistaken, is Astronaut ice cream. I think that was the first thing that my children devoured. It also has, I think that this book came with it, but I could be wrong because it's been ages. This is Scholastic Planets. This might have been a book that I just included in here. I don't remember. I'll have to look at what materials were included. And this would make just a great general a book that could be a spine for your unit study, just a general overview of astronomy. And then some of the materials are perishable, or I'm sorry, not perishable, I meant to say consumable. I mean, unless you really leave the astronaut ice cream out where it could get moisture, then I suppose it could be perishable. And some are consumable and some are not consumable, which means that we can go ahead and try to do these again. So I'm going to go through this kit and see what kinds of things we can utilize from this kit so that we can do these projects again. And then whatever materials we don't have that we want to do the projects again for, I will collect those. And then otherwise we do have other projects that we want to do that are not included in this kit that I have based on other resources. The last item that I want to share with you, this one is called Ramadan Moon. This one is no longer available from the vendor. This is by the Rustic Home. It's no longer available from this vendor, but this concept of having the moons and the phases of the moons, and on the flip side, you can label each one of the phases of the moon. You can still find this from other vendors, especially ones that are Montessori based, because this is all wood. Then you're going to have an easier time finding them there. When I got this kit, the phases of the moon, like all of the tiles were just blank wood. It came with a paintbrush and some paints, and we painted them. And one thing that I did differently than I think I've seen most, but I could be wrong, there could be others that are out there. And by the way, there is a video on this. It's also linked in the description box below. But I went ahead and I added the shadows and the details to the moon, and I think that it brings a realistic view to them, and I really, really love the way that it turned out. And then of course on the back side, you can see the names of each kind of moon. It was a little bit challenging to be able to write them in certain spots, but we were able to get it done. I hope that you enjoyed this look at our unit study for astronomy for elementary school. I hope that you'll check out the blog post that accompanies this video that has more information on the resources for our main lesson block and our unit study. You can find all of the resources on the blog post, and that link is in the description box below. And if you'd like to see how we're homeschooling on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram and now on TikTok at Pepper and Pine.